So this is pretty much what I'm going to go through today. The topics, you'll be like a lot of some applied concepts, a lot of some basic management tips, and I hope in the end of this you have at least a little more of tools in the box just to improve at the Feedyard level the quality of the silage that are being produced. So I'll start with like a brief introduction and basically just try to see how we can save the most of our dry matters and nutrients from all these different phases of the ensiling, from the aerobic, pre-ensiling, fermentation, storage, and feed out. Then a couple of these slides, what does that mean on the pocket, okay? The implication, the economical implications of these dry matter losses or better retention. And just like a final point, and also some tips on silage safety that we've been pretty vocal about it for the past years. So the silage, it's basically an anaerobic process for preservation of nutrients. Just the basic of this is well known and used for thousands of years. Just like pickling of food, like we're making sauerkraut or pickles. Basically with silage, we have the low pH, lack of oxygen, and that's how we preserve everything. It is a naturally occurring process. We all know that. We harvest the forage, chop, put in the silo. It's going to ferment some way, somehow, and boom, we got silage. But we want to make sure that we're going to have, in the end of the day, we're going to preserve the maximum amount of these original nutrients, dry matter, as well as create a stable product during the feed out. And I'm going to stress the fact that the presence of air is a primary factor that can affect the fermentation process. So air is basically the worst enemy of ensiling. And we always have to keep in mind that when you make silage, it's more like how much we can preserve. We try to preserve the most. It's really hard just to, we're going to end up with more dry matter or more nutrients or a much better quality. Not really. You have the starting material, and it's pretty much what you have and you try to preserve. And there are always going to be some losses. This was a review that was put together on a silage edition at a journal. And we see these different levels of management. So even under good management level, you see there are like some small losses throughout the different phases of the ensilage. Now, if we add, and some of these losses, they are just inevitable. Okay, we chop the plant will start respiring. We cannot stop that. During feed out, you're going to have some air going through the silage mess, through the phase. So you're going to lose also some nutrients. This is something we cannot avoid. But some of them that can be avoidable, and we're going to talk about this. For example, if you're not doing really a good packing job, or if you harvest the forage that's on a late maturity with lower nutrients, then you start just piling up all these losses. Adding to that, for example, the producer decides, I don't need to cover. It's not really necessary. It's kind of a pain. Everybody hates that process. It's always, too windy. The plastic is like blowing up everywhere. You're going to have to, eat up some of these losses. And some of other that can occur, for example, under an event of rain. Again, some of these factors we cannot control. We cannot control the elements. Sometimes you got a rain or something happens, or even like an equipment breakdown. Those things happen. But those that are under our control, we really have to make sure that, they will not happen. So the bottom line, as I said, we should start with a high quality forage, our starting material, rich in nutrients, with adequate dry matter content, and also have an excellent silage management. So we try to keep the most of those nutrients, the digestibility of those nutrients, so we can get a high quality silage. As I said, if we start with a poor quality material or the management level is really not good, chop length is too long or too short or not packing well, not covering, you're going to end up with a poor quality silage. So I have just like some guidelines, something just quick, just to drive home this point of the initial quality of the forage. I see a lot of corn silage. It's kind of almost like a staple in most of Feedyards that I've been visiting. So the optimum dry matter level for harvest, between 32, 37, sometimes 38. At this moisture content, the maturity of the plant is basically, is ideal. You have a good content of starch, digestibility, as well as the fiber digestion. Also, the physical characteristics of the plants, they lead to a good packing density, doing like a good packing job. There's still I really like to, based on the whole plant dry matter, I think it's much more reliable. Still some people, they go through this, the milk line, but it's so many different corn hybrids, you never know if you're really there on the moisture or not. If we decide to, or for some reason the corn is harvested too early, so what happens? You have low energy because there's a lot of simple sugars, not much of that starch accumulation in the kernels, so it's a lower energy crop. Also, you have the issue with the moisture. Higher moisture, you start packing, then you start just squeezing some of the juice, and that's really the soluble nutrients. You're losing a lot of them, as well as some issues with the environment and pollution because of that. And some of these wet corn or wet forage in general, we normally see an excess of organic acids produced. So it's kind of like a dilution effect. If there is a lot of moisture on that forage mass, there is more conditions for the microbes to remain active, and it's also harder to pickle because they have to work a little harder to produce enough acid to pickle everything. Now, on the other hand, if it's harvested too late, then you start having issues with the starch making like a matrix with the proteins in the kernel, with the prolamines. So it's kind of like an analogy with lignin and the fiber digestion. So along with the maturity, you start decreasing that starch digestibility. Also, the plant is more on the dry side, makes it harder to pack. Then you kind of start snowballing all of that issues, okay, it's a little hard to pack, I'm gonna chop a little shorter. Okay, then you're compromising the effective fiber. So then you're just trying to, put up all those different fires, and they're coming out from different angles. And poor packing, higher porosity, poor aerobic stability. This is a meta-analysis from some researchers in Wisconsin. And you see here on the y-axis, you have these different ranges of dry matter. And on the other axis, the total track starch digestibility. On the red bars, it's the unprocessed corn silage. The pink bars, processed corn silage. And we see the impact of processing on these different ranges of dry matter. And we can see they are most effective within that recommended range. So we got most of the statistical difference when it was between 32, 36% dry matter. Also, we got some effect between 36 and 40. But then when you start deviating each way, we start seeing less of an effect of processing. You can really crank those kernels, make it really tight, but there's just so much you're going to get out of that stuff. So back to that point, you try to be within that range. Otherwise, you start having all those little problems around it. Again, I'm going to spend a couple more slides on kernel processing. It's something that's been done on the dairy a lot and researched a lot. And I think there's still quite a bit of value because you have the energy from the kernels, from the starch on the corn plant. Sometimes 40, 45% are grains. So we really have to make sure that we can get the most out of them. This was when I was in grad school. We just grabbed a quarter pound of a sample that was not processed, one that was processed. We see on the left that was not processed, we could count 43 whole kernels. So they're you can easily see all over the place here. The one that was processed, we could count only 7. So it's really hard, to find some of these kernels. But then the next set of pictures, it's, it's really nice. It was kind of like one of the joys of grad school that we have to get from the other end, what was left. So we washed the manure, and the unprocessed corn silage that went through the animal, you see all these kernels that just went through, straight to the animal. I know it's a different system, that was done with a dairy cow and everything else, but still, we got all that energy, we got the kernels, it's not cheap to grow corn, so let's make sure that we can extract everything from that. I've seen some, quite a bit of small grains as well, a lot of, especially latritic kale, just like some guidelines, harvesting, something we recommend between 35–40% dry matter. You see there are two different stages of maturity, in the bud stage and heading or soft dough stage. And till a while back, I would consider that first stage, the bud stage, more like a protein crop, if you will. And the one on the bottom will be more like energy crop. Just considering, okay, it's a younger plant, you see a lot more of protein, and then with advanced maturity, we get yield, but start losing the quality of the plant, the nutrients. But then I was thinking, okay, you still have the starch on the grains. And then looking through some recent research, I could see that even though there's a little more on the starch, the effect of this high fiber digestibility on the young plant, it's much higher. You get more energy at this level compared to a later maturity. But then, of course, you have to pick your battles, and depends what your needs are on that yard or on that feedlot. At bud stage, you're probably going to need to wilt the plant, so it's going to take some more work, let's say. At soft dough stage, probably can just do a direct harvest. But I think it's still not as easy to ensile, especially if you start going a little off on the dry matter. The plants start getting a little drier, and especially with the hollow steams, it would be like a nightmare to pack. The next slide, is basically what we mentioned, was some like a quick and dirty study that we ran when I was in Delaware with Dr. Kung. So with the different stages of maturity or different cuts that we did, we start getting more on the plant height or the yield. That's this blue bar. But then at the same time, we have more on the fiber and quite a bit of a drop on the fiber digestibility, as well as a decline on the levels of crude protein. So it's that thing, I really want to just the roughage, I just want the tonnage. So then you're more like on the right side of this graph. But then, at the same time, I really can use some of those nutrients. Then, of course, you start going a little more on the young maturity. Now, we're going to spend some time. We already have this kind of like guidelines on dry matter, on chop length, on maturity. Now, let's talk about air, the detrimental effects of air. Worst enemy of silage. Front end will delay fermentation. Fermentation should not have air. Until we reach that point, we're going to be wasting nutrients, dry matter, and the population of these aerobic microorganisms will just start to go up. During storage and feed out, the air will stimulate the growth of the spoilage yeast. These are the guys that will start all that process of aerobic spoilage and lead that microbial activity or the metabolic activity will lead to excess heating and the silage spoilage. Now, some losses during pre-ensiling, and that's something that, it is avoidable, but it's not. It depends how fast you can do that job. So we chop the forage, the plant, it's still alive. So I would always think of more a microbial process, but there is a lot to do with the plant respiration as well. So both of them respiring, they're burning nutrients, energy, producing water, CO2, heat, and free ammonia nitrogen. Now, one point interesting, each increase on 18 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 10 Celsius. This corresponds to 1.7 loss in dry matter. And there is naturally that increase on the fermentation, the heat of fermentation that we cannot avoid. So that's why some of these losses, we cannot do anything about it. Specifically protein damage, prolonged temperatures of 104 Fahrenheit, 40 Celsius or higher, then you start seeing all that Maillard reaction or caramelization. Some of that protein will bind with sugars under hot temperature and moisture, and that becomes unavailable. So you decrease the feed digestibility and also the animal performance. This was a picture that I took when I was in a place in Michigan, and I think I was waiting for a nutritionist or the manager, somebody, and they were bringing these loads of alfalfa and just dumping in front of the silo. Nobody was pushing or packing anything. I started scratching my head, was like, well, what's going on here? So I decided just to get close to the pile, grab a couple of handfuls, and we can see on the outside, you know, it looks nice and green and everything, but right here in the middle is already all kind of like burned out. And using infrared camera, we can take these thermal pictures. So we have the range here on the going from like 78 to 119 Fahrenheit. We see that where it's purple bluish is the coolest, which is on the outside. That was basically the ambient temperature. But then where is the spot temperature? Right here on this cross, it was 118 Fahrenheit. So that's, I don't know, 50 something Celsius from 27 or so. But in Fahrenheit, it's about 40. Almost like a 40-degree difference. Then we just, if we go back to this slide, that's a solid like 3.5 loss, you know, at least correspondent. So it's like, okay, this could be avoided. So let's, you know, just push and pack. This is kind of like explains what happened as well, not only like the plant respiration, but also the aerobic microorganisms on that forage mass. This was on fresh plant corn that was harvested and not packed. So you see the different hours of delay packing, 0, 6, 12, 24, population of yeast and molds. So on the starting point, we are about log 5.5, so it's about 500,000 CFUs per gram. This should be your challenge. But for some reason, you're taking a little long, you know, not much of an effect right here, but after 12 hours, there is a 10-fold increase. So you go from 500 to 5 million CFUs. Another 12 hours, you're up to 50 million CFUs of each. So instead of having this type of problem when the silo is open, you're up here. So that's one thing. Okay, we have a lot of, we got good guys and bad guys on the silage as well. So a lot of these bad guys, you know, their population is much higher. And during those hours, what they're doing, they're burning the sugars, the water-soluble carbohydrates. These are actually, this is the fuel for the lactic acid bacteria to produce acid for the inciting fermentation. But then you're just burning these sugars while waiting to pack. And this will lead to dry matter losses. So at some point, we just skyrocket. Some packing density basics. We recommend to spread the forage as progressive wedge. So it's a better, safer way to do. Thin layers, 6-inch, around 15 centimeters. I'm gonna show a spreadsheet in a minute. You see the impact of the layer thickness, you know, is really strong. Pack tight, continuously, using heavy tractors or tractors. Need to put some latches, some weight, water in the tires, whatever you need. The tire should cover the entire surface before distributing another load or another surface. And this is kind of like a little nice, easy formula. We call the Ruppel's 800 rule. It's like, okay, so how much weight do I need? Is it enough or is it too much? Or, you know, all we need to do is multiply the amount of tons delivered by 800. So for example, if the rate of harvest is 100 tons per hour times 800, you're going to need 80,000 pounds of packing weight in this case. Now, I just changing a little to metric, we can do like a 400 factor in terms of kilograms and metric tons. So you just multiply how many tons by 400 and you pretty much get the same result. This picture was taken in a yard in, I think in Nebraska, no, Kansas or Nebraska. Where's Galen? Remember? No? I think they were putting up 3D kale. We were waiting for the owner. And it was like it is a big yard. So I started looking at that. I took a picture. I was like, okay, do they have like enough packing weight? So how many semis we can see? We can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's still like more, you know, there was like a line of trucks. And push our packing tractors, 1, 2, and 3. So when we talked to the manager and we're just going through some numbers, they were using half of the weight that they should have been using. So that's, you know, a really simple calculation that can help on the final packing density. And this is just a graph that, again, by that fellow Kurt Ruppel, just showing that lower density, you have higher porosity, more air that's trapped, higher dry matter losses. And by increasing the packing density, you start decreasing these estimated dry matter losses. This is the spreadsheet that I mentioned. This website from the University of Wisconsin Extension Service, you have a wide range of different types of spreadsheet calculators, really, really useful. I recommend, you know, to visit and take a look and play around with some numbers, some spreadsheets. This one specifically is to calculate the packing density or to project the packing density, depending on what type of parameters you're using. So we have the delivery rate, dry matter content, packing layer, the amount of weight, and in this case, boom, we got 15. So that's the recommended, you know, at least 15 pounds dry matter per cubic feet. Now, I decided to monkey around with some of these numbers, and I changed, for example, 180 tons instead of 120 delivery rate, 9 inches instead of 6 inches of the layer thickness, and using 60,000 pounds instead of 80,000 pounds of packing weight. And the result was something, you know, not even 11 pounds dry matter cubic feet of packing of the density. Now remember that graph from Kurt Ruppel? That's 4.3 points of, you know, equivalent to higher losses. Just, you know, you fine tune a little your packing job and you see improvements on the dry matter recovery and of course in nutrient recovery. Some other principles, this is not, you know, this first slide is not much like a, you know, brain surgery or anything like that. You have more weight, you're gonna pack more and deeper. It's like you think you have like Lindsay by my side and me, so I'll probably be like going down quite a little more than her. The next slide that I thought was kind of interesting, it's more like the same axle weight or load, but we have different width on the tire. So we have the narrow tire on the left, wider one on the right. So the depth of compaction was the same, but the one that it's narrow compact more at a shallow, let's say, depth. So this could be something, it could be interesting, okay, on the final load that's harder to pack. On the top, you know, the final loads, you could use one that's a little narrow just to have a little more weight. But then on the same time, okay, yeah, that could work, but then you have to make sure that you're not gonna have issues, you know, with traction and spinning off and messing up everything. So it's just all the, you know, the points that we have to think about and consider. Everything is packed, gotta cover right away. We have to protect against air. Air is what? The worst enemy of ensiling. Plastic, the polyethylene, it's the regular plastic, that's what we see the most. Thicker the better. It's more like a physical barrier through the oxygen translution. These plastics, they have white and the black face on each side. I know it's kind of like a no-brainer, but I've seen more times than I really wanted with the dark side, with the black side facing up, just attracting more heat, and the white side down. So there was a research done, and this can represent as much as an extra 20 degrees Fahrenheit on the top 6-inch layer. So it's already a challenge, it's hard to pack, and you're gonna just decide, oh, let's cook a little more. So no, white face up. Oxygen barrier films, I really like them, especially because they're so clingy and they sit on the surface like really well. With the standard plastic, you can see that it's hard and you keep more of like air pockets. So I think that's as important as the oxygen effect of the barrier, oxygen barrier effect. Some people have been using 2 layers of plastic. Standard plastic, maybe the oxygen barrier and the standard on the top. That's an option. And as we see on this pile, more weight or entire, whole tires on the seams and also on the edges. And along the whole body of the surface, you can use just splits, but make sure that they are touching each other. This was a pile I think it was in Idaho. And it seems, everything was nice. You see the splits, they have the 2 sheets of plastic, but still those guys were pitching, this much of spoilage. So, the idea, the concept was nice, but if the final packing job was not adequate and you had air trapped, and you're gonna end up with spoilage, you're gonna end up with a crust. Unfortunately, we still see like a lot of these silos on the feed yards that are not covered, and I don't know if it's just an extra cost, extra job, or maybe the losses are not that many. I think it will be okay. This study was done Keith Bolson when he was back at Kansas State in 1993. We have 3 different crops, uncovered silage, covered with the standard plastic, with the polyethylene, and the loss is measured at the top 10 inches, 20, and then 30. So across all these crops, virtually we have like 80% of losses on the top 10 inches. So that's pretty much when you see the crust. And it's, it doesn't stop there. It's kind of like a gradient. You have those losses, but you also keep having losses going down till you see kind of like an okay silage. So not only are exposed to the air, you get the rain or you have some problems, and that stuff, it just keeps adding to the spoilage. So the one that was on the 3 crops, they were covered, you see that the losses were way, way smaller than uncovered. This was kind of like a classic study that he did also in Kansas. This experimental bunker was not covered. This was the original height of the silo that was not covered. And when they started to finish the experiment and they fed out this to some steers, they were at 22 inches. So they started at 36 and they lost all this on the shrinkage. So, you have all that nice material that starts spoiling and you just start to lose and you have this crust of, crap, basically. So they went like on the next step and, how about, we're gonna feed to steers. Some people, that's all I have to feed to them. So they add this spoiled silage in different amounts on the diet. As I said, those were beef steers. And we can see on these two parameters, dry matter intake and the fiber digestibility, just this initial, just this first increment of 5% of spoiled silage in the diet. The intake, we see a drop of 1.3 pounds per head per day. And on the fiber digestibility, more than 7 points drop on the NDFD. So that was a big impact on those steers. And you have to think, okay, how much that represents on the dry matter I'm losing, the nutrients, and the impact on the animals. So now let's go a little more on the fermentation per se. As I said, we also have the good and the bad guys. And based on all these talks, earlier today with Dr. Shays and yesterday, everything is basically microbiology. It's all about the microbes. The plant comes from the field colonized by these different types of microbes. We got the good guys, mainly lactic acid bacteria, what we really want. Bad guys, fungi, yeast, molds, enterobacteria, clostridia, bacilli. Pretty much like us, our skin is colonized by microbes. So it's not different with the plants. And then when we put them in the silo, there will be like a dominant species or type of a microbe that will direct the fermentation. And of course, we want these guys here to prevail. So in this case, that's the first reason we think, okay, make sure you're going to use an inoculant. We have no idea how many and at what ratio these guys are coming from. So it's kind of like, well, it's a natural process, so I'm going to roll the dice and hope for the best. So, you can, but hey. One day I was still in grad school, like finishing up, and I did like a little bit of work with molecular biology. Silage was kind of like starting at that time. And I had like plated some of the fresh corn just to see where my lactic acid bacteria population was. And then I thought, you know what? We got the guys on the other lab doing molecular work, microbe identification. I'm going to pick some colonies and see what I have on this medium. This, in theory, is specific to grow lactic acid bacteria that we call the MRS plates or MRS medium. So when the results came back, this is how much lactic acid bacteria really I found, 14%. Half of this enterobacteria. I was like, geez. Imagine everything that we cultivate and doing the molecular techniques, what we're bringing and how challenging it is to have a good fermentation. It's pretty much like a simple process. As I said, we convert the sugars to acid, specifically lactic acid, and I insist on the lactic acid because it's a strong acid. Strong acid leads to this sharp drop on the pH. That's when, we say the magic happens, if you will. We want to be as effective, as fast as possible, and have a stable product during storage. It's not static. There will be a little bit of change, but we want to be stable. There is this threshold of pH 5, and it's really important to go below that as fast as possible to start inhibiting some of the plant enzymes, especially proteases. Also, enterobacteria and clostridia, they are sensitive to the low pH. If you're trying, or we're just relying on that natural population of microbes, normally it's inefficient because there's so many different types of microbes. So the pH drop is on a much lower rate, and if it's taking much longer to cross this pH 5, we just give more opportunity to those undesirable microbes. That's when we might have Clostridia take over. So Clostridia, it's just, we heard some benefits on the first talk today, but in silage, they're just horrible. They're just gonna use nutrients. They waste like about 50% of dry matter in their metabolism, produce some unwanted compounds, biogenic amines, and People that travel a lot for work, and sometimes you're at the hotel room, you're away from the family, you feel lonely. You go to your yard and you step on a Clostridial silage, you take a flight on the same day, you're going to be the most popular guy on that flight. So at least a lot of people will be like looking at you, you know, not in a nice way, but will. Yeah, it's like, what is that? Also the issue that I mentioned, if it's too wet, you're going to see some over-fermented feeds, just the high acid load. I never seen like an impact on the intake. I think it's more like extend fermentation, higher nutrient dry matter losses. And finally, we open the silo, we're going to see some spoilage yeast activity. This will happen sometime, some way, you know, they will happen. So we just have to make sure that we can inhibit them long enough that we feed the fresh silage to our animals. This is just an example on the front-end fermentation. You see there's like a wide number of trials with corn silage, haylage, barley silage, different research institutions, universities. And one point, it's you add an inoculant, you're adding good bacteria, you're adding good microbes. You're always going to see a positive response. The exact magnitude of response, it's kind of hard, you know, just to say a number. You know, we say an average. I like to be a little more conservative, and I normally say, you know, about 4%. You know, it will vary, of course. We look at the first one, the difference was a better retention at 1.2 points. Yeah, not a whole lot, huh? Well, but then, you know, it doesn't take too long. We see on this third study, 8.2 points. So again, it's, you know, we just cannot predict what type of challenge is coming from the field, but definitely we should reinforce that army of the good bugs. The problem, I'm talking about lactic acid, that's really important, it's really strong, but it's not a good preservative. It's not a good acid against the spoilage yeasts. Normally, when we need to extend the life of a TMR, we use those products that are basically based on prop acid, right? That's the most common. You have other weak chain fatty acids, sorbic, benzoic, but normally it's prop acid. And acetic acid is also a good preservative. So it's pretty much in the same class, but it's different from lactic acid. On these two pictures, we see the one on the left was an egg bag, was actually at the Farm University in Delaware. And we can see there is like a mold patch like right here on the top. So I don't know, some of the air got like trapped or channeled there, but that's enough just to allow that microbe activity. We check the temperature. This 57, that's about 14, 15 Celsius. 105, almost like a 50-degree difference. So I really like that some of these thermal pictures, you know, they really show some situations. And 105 is just above like 40, 41 Celsius. Some on the management, this pile, I think they were feeding like half. I cannot remember really well. That's one of the first pictures I took. But it just illustrates, you know, the fresh side of that pile. So on this one, that's being fed out every day and kind of like recycle the new material, and you're getting, you know, you're winning that fight against the air penetration. This was, the font is really small, but it's about like 72. And here, I know it's more like an effect on the ambient temperature, but here is like on the low 90s. So it's a 20-degree difference. So you have that stuff exposed to air, to elements, and you know, producer said, oh, I can just, you know, I'll cut like a slide on one side and the other side before I actually start feeding. It's like, oh boy, that's going to be a lot of loads, a lot of wagons that, you know, it should be like good quality feed, and it's basically, you know, fertilizer. From the initial fermentation, called the front end, now to the feed out, to the back end. This is another class of products of inoculants that we offer, and specifically produce moderate amounts of acetic acid. So that's the preservative. That's what's going to extend the shelf life, or, you know, the feed bank life, if you will. This comes from Lactobacillus buchneri. That's a farm scale study done in, I think, 4 different bags per treatment, treated or not with a buchneri. We see first on the feeding losses, so there is a 4.4 points better dry matter retention. So you're retaining more, but I really like this study because it shows nutrient losses. So the corn silage that was not treated, you end up with less material of lower quality. So we talk a lot about shrinkage and dry matter losses, but hey, you know, when you have spoilage, the really good stuff goes first. Organic acids, amino acids, residual sugars. So that's, you know, a lot that we should preserve. You end up proportionally with a little more ash, a little more fiber. And some of these parameters here on the bottom, the one that was inoculated, the pH is still a little lower, just stable. And the population of spoilage is, you know, there is pretty much like a 2.5, like a 500-fold difference on the population of these spoilage yeasts. Now some pictures on the phase management. Oh, good Lord, here we go. This was in Idaho. This was one pile for the whole place. So it was corn silage, it was legume, grass, haylage type of mix, high moisture corn from the year before. Everything, really everything was in one pile. So it's like, how can you really administrate and do an inventory that way? And how you make a TMR? You kind of like shave everything and mix, so you got everything, you know, all together. So we see it's too big of a pile. The inventory can be done much better. The phase management, you know, is not straight. You see a lot of exposed surface. Plastic is pulled way back. We see a crust. So it's just not good. This one compliments to my colleague Lindsay. She forwarded me this picture, and I had to use. So this was actually on a dairy, and as I said, there's always an explanation. You ask the producer, you ask the guy in the feed yard or in the dairy, they're going to have an explanation, a reason for that. So when you ask about that, you know, you look at that, it's kind of like a Tetris piece. It's like, well, what is that about? It was like, think of a watermelon. You cut a watermelon, and right in the center is that bright red, juicy, tasty, really good stuff. So on his concept, it's like silage. So I'm going to just like make like a tunnel on the middle and get that silage to my high-producing animals. So it doesn't matter that, you know, it's not like it works. You're making all this extra surface, all this exposure that's unnecessary. And, you know, that's how he called, was the corazone. So that's the, you know, right in the middle, that's the heart of the watermelon. So, you know, it's kind of like, you know, we laugh, but I look at this and sometimes I want to cry. It's just because, you know, I'm so into this whole silage thing. And when you see some of these issues or waste on dry matter, nutrients, you know, at the end of the day, you want them to do a good job. And speaking of not doing a good job, it was basically like a compost pile, right, Galen? That was in December. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He remembers that. So it was not covered, basically was not packed. This was corn silage. And it's not. I don't think it's inexpensive to grow corn. You got the seed, you got the fertilizer, you got all these different expenses. Then you decide to dump the corn and not do a packing job, not cover. We can see on a more like on a detail shot, you know, there were like molds all over the place. We just took some, you know, you just like pull a little bit from the face. The temperature was 121. I don't know, 50 or 60 degrees, or it was just cooking. You know, this is just compost. Now let's talk about some numbers. How are we with? Oh, the pressure is on. I'm getting there. Pressure is on. Times the clock's ticking. Common dry matter losses, can be using 15, 20%, especially talk about, feed yards can be way higher. Reducing a 5-point percentile. What type of impact we would see? I put some numbers together, and the way I put these numbers is just like to make life easier. Maybe it's not really accurate, but just to make our life easier to understand the numbers. Considering 10,000 tons of silage, this would be equivalent to 500 tons that will be saved. And then we think, okay, assuming I have a 25-ton fresh matter yield per acre, this would save 20 acres. So especially people, I don't have like a lot of space. Well, you do a better job reducing your losses, you're going to have more space. Even on the footprint of the pile, or you're just going to make it more dense, and of course you're going to reduce, make a little shorter, and of course safer. Also on that same 5 points of more or less spoilage or less waste, this would be equivalent to $20,000 at $40 a ton on a fresh matter basis. I think it's a little high, but just to see the numbers more like clean. And if we are losing that 500 tons, at some point we should replace that. Just making it energy or TDN equivalent, that would be corresponded to basically 400 tons of shell corn. So not only you're losing a lot of this feed and money, you're going to have to replace and spend more money on that. So all those different points that we think, and it's not just dry matter. You have all these different issues that start almost like irradiate from that. So in summary, there is no magic solution. People that say, hey, I'm here at your place and I'm going to send an inoculant that's going to change your life. You don't have to do anything. That's not how it works. You have to pay attention to all details. Follow all the basic management recommendations from the beginning, from the aerobic phase to the end during feed out. There is an article on the magazine, on Tech Magazine, called Progressive Forage Grower, and I wrote with Bob Charlie, and it was just out this week. So I asked Amanda, and she's emailing a copy, so you're not going to be bored on your flight. You can, take a look. So a lot of these basic management points I wrote in the article, or I wrote with Bob, not just me. And just to finalize, feed yards, dairy farm, all these operations, they are dangerous. And we're focusing a lot on the silage safety. So always, be careful around silos. I have some tips, and I'm going to just leave this slide on, just to take a look. Always be careful. I think that's the worst, is when you're like, I grew up doing this, I got it. That's how it is. That's how I got a silage accident back in Brazil, my dad also. So it's something just like, be careful, have somebody with you, just not be, too, how can I say? We think that some stuff will not happen to us, but they can.